Don't use the connecting flight, the gate agent said quietly, leaning just close enough that only I could hear. I know that's not what your ticket says, but don't get on that plane with him. She was already walking away before I could ask what she meant. I stood there at Gate 14 of Vancouver International Airport, carry-on in one hand, boarding pass in the other, watching her disappear into the crowd of people who had no idea what she'd just said to me. My husband was 20 feet away at the coffee kiosk, ordering 2 Americanos like he did every morning, like everything was completely fine, like we were just a normal couple on our way to a delayed honeymoon in Portugal. We'd been married 11 days. My name is Sable Merritt, and I grew up in a family that didn't talk about money the way other families did. My parents were both teachers in Kelowna. We weren't wealthy, but when my grandmother passed 3 years ago, she left me something I never expected, her house on the Okanagan, which we sold, plus a trust that had been quietly building since before I was born. The total came to just over $340,000. My parents made me promise, before the ink was even dry on the estate paperwork, that I would never put that money in a joint account without a marriage contract. They weren't suspicious people, they were just careful in the way that people who'd never had much tend to be when they finally do. I broke that promise, not all at once, just slowly, the way you agree to things when you're in love and the other person makes it feel like caution is the same thing as distrust. My husband's name doesn't matter as much as what he did, but for the sake of telling this properly, I'll call him what I called him then. I called him mine. We met at a work conference in Calgary 2 years before the wedding. He was charming in a way that felt effortless, which I now understand is not the same as genuine. He knew things. He had opinions about wine and urban planning and obscure Canadian history. He made me feel like I'd been waiting my whole life to meet someone who saw the world the same way I did. When he proposed at a restaurant in Gastown with my grandmother's ring resized on my finger, he'd asked my mother for it. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The cracks were small at first, easy to dismiss. He didn't like my best friend from university. He thought she was negative energy. He suggested I stop sharing financial details with my parents because it was embarrassing, like I was a teenager still asking permission. He encouraged me to move my portion of the trust into a joint high-interest savings account he'd set up through a private wealth management firm based in Toronto. Not a bank, a firm. He explained the difference with such confidence that I nodded along even though something small and quiet in my chest said to wait. I didn't wait. By the time we got to that airport in October, $290,000 of my grandmother's money was sitting in an account with both our names on it. I had the login credentials. I checked it sometimes, the way you check a smoke alarm, not because you think there's a fire, but because the alternative is not checking. The gate agent had moved on completely. She was scanning boarding passes 2 rows over, her back to me, professional and unreachable. My husband came back with the coffees. He smiled when he handed me mine. That specific smile, open, relaxed, the one that used to make me feel like I'd won something, landed differently now. I took the cup and said thank you and tried to identify what was wrong with my own heartbeat. I said I needed to use the restroom before we boarded. He said of course, we had time. He sat down, stretched his legs, pulled out his phone. I walked past the restrooms. I found the gate agent near the service desk at the end of the terminal. I had to wait while she finished with another passenger. When she turned and saw me, something shifted in her face. Not surprise exactly, more like she'd been expecting this. I need to know what you meant, I said. I wasn't angry. I was very, very calm, which is what I do when something frightens me. She looked at the space around us, then back at me. She was maybe 50, short hair, the kind of tired competence you see in people who've worked in airports for 20 years. I probably shouldn't have said anything, she said. But I've been doing this job for a long time. What did you see? She paused. Then she said, and I will remember this for the rest of my life, a woman who doesn't know she's about to have a very bad trip. That's not specific enough. She looked toward the gate where my husband was sitting. Your husband's been on his phone since you sat down 3 hours ago. I noticed him. He walked the whole terminal twice. He went into the men's room for 22 minutes. He came out and made 2 phone calls standing against the wall past the currency exchange, where it's harder to see him from the main walkway. She folded her hands. I've seen that pattern before. I'm not saying I know what it means. I'm saying I've seen it before. And the last time I saw it, the woman got on the plane. What happened to her? She didn't answer that directly. I'm just saying, if there's anything you need to sort out before you leave the country, this is the time. I thanked her. I walked back to the main terminal slowly. I didn't go back to the gate. Instead, I sat in a chair near the windows of the far end of the building where I could see Gate 14 without being seen. I opened the banking app on my phone. The joint account still showed the balance I expected. I exhaled. Then I opened my email. There was a message from the wealth management firm, sent at 6:47 a.m. that morning, before we'd left the apartment. It was a notification. A pending transfer request had been initiated. $280,000. Outgoing, flagged for my confirmation, which was required because of a dual authorization setting I had insisted on when we first opened the account. The request had been initiated from his device. The destination account was not one I recognized. I sat with that information for a while. I want to be honest about what those minutes felt like, because I think people expect a certain kind of reaction. Tears, shaking hands, the urge to scream. What I actually felt was something closer to the sensation you get when you're driving on a highway in winter and you feel the tires start to lose the road. Everything goes very quiet. Your body knows before your brain does what's actually happening. I did not cry. I opened my notes app and I started writing down everything I could remember about the last 6 months. Account numbers, dates of conversations, the name of the firm, the name of the person he'd introduced me to there, a man I'd only met once at a dinner in Toronto who shook my hand too long and called me the lovely wife without ever asking my name. Then I called my father. He answered on the second ring, which is always how he answers when he knows it might be important. I didn't say hello. I said, I need you to get a lawyer on the phone today. Don't ask me anything yet. Just do that. He said, I'll call you back in 15 minutes. He called back in 11. My husband texted me at 7,053, boarding soon, where are you? I texted back, coming. Got turned around near the shops. At A4, I watched from the windows as the gate line formed. I watched him stand in it. I watched him check his phone twice. I watched him look toward the terminal, scanning. Not frantically, just efficiently, like a man recalibrating a plan rather than a man worried about his wife. I did not get on that plane. I watched the gate door close from my seat by the windows. Then I called my bank directly and told them I needed to speak to someone about fraud prevention. The woman who helped me was patient and thorough. She walked me through the pending transfer. She confirmed it required my digital authorization, which had not been given. The transfer was suspended. By the time I got to the main exit and called a cab, I had spoken to my father, a family lawyer he'd reached through a colleague, and the firm directly. That last call was the most interesting. The man I spoke to there, not the one I'd met, a different one, more junior, stumbled when I identified myself. He put me on hold for 4 minutes. When he came back, he said everything was routine, and there was nothing to worry about. He said my husband had called that morning to update the beneficiary structure. On a joint savings account. On the first day of our honeymoon. I wrote that down too. I spent the next 3 hours in an airport hotel meeting room with my laptop, a phone charger, and a document my lawyer had emailed me. The document was a summary of rights under BC's Family Law Act related to excluded property, specifically property inherited before marriage, which, under certain conditions and with the right documentation, can be traced and recovered even if it's been moved into joint accounts. My grandmother's trust had originally come to me as a direct inheritance. I had documentation. I had the original estate paperwork. I had every transfer record going back to the beginning. I had more than he thought I did. My husband landed in Lisbon 14 hours later. I know this because his location sharing, which I had never thought to question, because why would I, showed me exactly where he was. He hadn't turned it off, which told me either he was careless or he thought I was still in the dark. He texted at the gate, "Just landed. You must have missed the flight. What happened? Call me." I read it and put my phone face down on the hotel desk. The next morning, I filed a report with the BC Securities Commission regarding the wealth management firm and the attempted transfer. I filed a separate complaint with FinTrack, Canada's financial intelligence unit, regarding the offshore routing information my lawyer had identified in the destination account details. These are not quick processes. They're not designed to be, but they create a paper trail, and a paper trail is a very specific kind of weapon. My lawyer advised me not to contact him. I didn't need to be told twice. He called 6 times the first day. Then his tone in the voicemails changed, from confused to concerned, to something that sounded almost like controlled, like he was managing a situation rather than trying to reach his wife. He left a message on day 2 that said we needed to talk about a misunderstanding with the account and that he had a simple explanation. He said I had overreacted to something routine. My grandmother used to say, when someone tells you've overreacted, ask yourself who benefits from your reaction being smaller. I didn't call him back. What I didn't know, and what I found out later, was that the woman from his 22 minutes in the airport bathroom, I don't know her name and I don't want to, had been involved with him for the better part of a year. She wasn't in Lisbon with him. She was in Toronto, where she had, it turned out, also been receiving small wire transfers from an account he managed. Not my account. A different one. One he'd set up years before we met. I was not the first. I want to say that clearly and without drama, because I think people hear that and expect the person saying it to fall apart. I didn't. I found it almost clarifying. It meant his behavior was a pattern. Patterns are easier to document than impulses. 3 weeks after I watched that plane door close at gate 14, I sat across from my husband in a mediator's office in downtown Vancouver. He had flown back when my lawyer made it clear, through his lawyer, that returning was in his interest. He looked the same. A little less rested. The same jacket. He sat down and looked at me like he was hoping to find the version of me that still believed him. I had documentation of the attempted transfer. I had a report from FinTrack confirming the destination account had been flagged for review. I had records of the Toronto transfers, obtained through the legal process. I had a statement from the wealth management firm, secured under regulatory pressure, that showed he had attempted to update the account structure 3 days before our wedding. 3 days before. He looked at the folder my lawyer slid across the table, and something in his face went through several phases very quickly. The last one landed somewhere between calculation and resignation. "I just want to understand how we got here," he said. I looked at him steadily. "You initiated a transfer of $280,000 on the morning of our honeymoon flight," I said. "That's how we got here." "That was a mistake, a miscommunication with the firm." "Don't," my lawyer said quietly. Just that word. Don't. He signed the annulment paperwork 40 minutes later. Under BC law, an annulment on grounds of fraud is not fast. It requires specific findings, but the documentation we had was sufficient to begin that process, and his lawyer had clearly told him that contesting it would be worse. As part of the agreement, the firm released the joint account back to sole name control under my information. The pending transfer was formally canceled. The $290,000, minus legal fees I won't pretend weren't significant, came back to an account with only my name on it. He didn't say anything when we stood to leave. I didn't expect him to. I did expect, maybe, to feel something larger than I did. Grief or fury or relief so strong it made my knees uncertain. What I actually felt was tired in the way you feel after you've been holding something heavy for a very long time and you finally set it down. Tired and very, very light. A week after the mediation, I went back to the airport, not for any practical reason. I just needed to see the building as something other than the place where my marriage ended. I found the gate agent at a service desk near arrivals. She recognized me immediately, which surprised me. She asked if I was okay. I said I thought so. She nodded like that was the right answer. I asked her how she'd known, what she'd seen in him that morning that made her say something to a stranger. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know anything about him. I just knew something about you. You had this look. A lot of women have it, and they don't know they have it. Like you're trying to convince yourself you're not worried." I didn't say anything. "I've learned," she said, "that the women who look like that usually have a reason." I thanked her. She went back to work. I drove back to Kelowna the next morning. My parents were in the driveway when I pulled in, which is the kind of thing parents do when they know you need to come home. My mother made coffee. My father didn't ask any questions I didn't want to answer. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid and looked out at the Okanagan Hills in October, everything gold and amber and the specific color of a season letting go. My grandmother had left me her house and her savings so that I would have something that was mine, something no one else could take. I'd come close to losing it, not because I was foolish, but because I'd trusted someone who knew exactly what to do with other people's trust. The account was mine again. The money was mine again. And I had learned something that no amount of money could have taught me any other way. I used to believe that being careful meant being afraid. Now I think careful is just another word for paying attention. And sometimes a stranger in a busy airport pays attention when you can't. She told me not to get on that plane. She didn't know what would happen if I did, neither did I. But I listened, and that made all the difference.